Hi everyone, it's Will back with another installment of the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. Today we have 1915, a recap for yesterday. From yesterday, we went over the various publications that, so Grunwald tells us that Dmitri did 2 press interviews that were arranged either by himself, or by Grunwald or other people who wanted someone in the imperial family to make a definitive statement about Ukraine and the Nazis' plans to take it over and install a Romanov puppet king, which would have been who would have been Vladimir Kirillich. So yeah, interesting stuff. Our cast for today in 1915, well, we have Georgy Mikhailovich Laming back. He'd gone with his son to Petrograd. Seems like it was about, a couple weeks ago. Now he was back. Dmitri's main mentor or male role model. You can't really use either of those because being a Grand Duke, Laming was both of those and neither of those. Anyway, Stepanov, this quite respectable man in his 50s, attached to Ella, whom Dmitri didn't want to be embarrassed in front of on the morning when he had a hangover. Ella herself, Philip and son, I don't know who they were, but they're attached to Stepanov somehow. And then our 3 ladies, Geltzer, Nastya, and Tamara. Okay, so, let's get going. It's the 13/26th of January in Moscow at room number 10 in the Metropole Hotel. It's 2 degrees above freezing, and Dmitri describes the weather as filthy and warm. So he's in the big city, so I don't know if he means that, after being out in the countryside, things seem just dirty and grubby and grimy, or if he means that it was, just raining and nasty weather. Okay. I got up around 12 o'clock, even though I hadn't done anything in particular the day before. Well, but that conversation I had with Geltzer yesterday was remarkably interesting. While I was still in bed, GM arrived from Petrograd and said that the new Renault had arrived and would be purchased. He was upset that I had stopped taking arsenic, but agreed that with the kind of diarrhea I'd been having, it was better to do so. At 1 o'clock, we went to Stepanov's for lunch. Philip was there and his son, a volunteer in the Horse Grenadiers Regiment. Around 3 o'clock, I went to see Auntie. I went home around 5 o'clock, talked with GM, and then had dinner with him. Around 8 o'clock, I went to the Maly Theater. They were giving One Old Friend is Better Than Two New Ones by Ostrovsky, and then in parentheses he puts the name of Sadovskaya, who was the main female actress, and The Imaginary Invalid by Molière. Both were amazingly performed. Afterwards, there was a boring dinner at the Metropole with Nastya, Geltzer, Tamara, GM, and myself. Nastya tried to act classy around GM, and feeble Tamara was pathetic to the point of madness. It was dramatic. I think that's a little joke on his part because he's there with 2 actresses and a ballerina, and so he says it was dramatic. That's our boy, right? Okay, so what to say about this one? Getting up at 12. Yeah, that was unusual for him to sleep, to stay in bed, to sleep quite that long. And as we've seen in 1921, and we'll see also in post-revolutionary diary entries, he wasn't doing it anymore. Even if he had a late night and was up to the wee hours, he seems to have been more conscientious about getting up at the normal time. Whether that was good or not, because sleep deprivation isn't good, of course. So I'd still love to know what was so interesting about this conversation with Geltzer, far outweighing the kissing, the making out. But, as I said before, sometimes Dmitri uses the word interesting to refer to having sex with someone, but usually he puts it in quotation marks or ... after the word interesting, and so you can, sorry about that, you can pretty easily tell also from the context. And in this instance, it really was a conversation that really fascinated him. Yeah, I guess we'll never know unless there is floating around somewhere a Geltzer diary. Okay, the Renault, the new car. Wow, what a thing to be doing during the middle of the first half of the First World War. There is a photo of him with this car in his military greatcoat and uniform, standing in the courtyard, I believe, of his palace in St. Petersburg, with this enormous car. So apparently it was the new model, and he had his eye on it. And one of the things that Laming did while he was in Petrograd was to take delivery of this car, or to see the car wherever it was at the dealership, and then arrange to buy it. So I was lazy and didn't go looking for the photo, but if any of you have an extensive background of looking into Dmitri's life, then you, I think, will certainly recall this photo. Probably pretty easy to find. So we still don't know why he was taking arsenic, and if it was in any way related to syphilis. I just can't think what other reason they would give him arsenic. I mean, obviously it was kind of a last resort drug, because it was so it had so many side effects. And when he says arsenic, does he actually mean salvarsan, the arsenic derivative that was used to treat syphilis? I don't know. Why is Georgy Mikhailovich upset about it initially? Sorry about that in the background. I really don't want to stop. I'm 8 minutes into this. Why was Laming upset? Well, apparently he, and we could infer from that, the doctors thought that it was important, that Dmitri needed it. So you remember in one of the previous letters when he told us while in Usovo that he'd stopped taking the arsenic, he said it was beating him 16 times a day. So now we find out that what he was talking about specifically was diarrhea. So yeah, quite easy to imagine, taking arsenic. Dmitri calls it rat poison, basically. Quite easy to conceive of that giving you diarrhea or some other horrible stomach problem. So even when he's told that, even Laming has to concede that, that wasn't good. Okay, so then there's this meeting with Stepanov, and this person that Dmitri obviously knows, since he uses his first name and not even just a surname, Philip, with his son. And Philip's son is a volunteer in the Horse Grenadiers Regiment. And again, looking at Dmitri in this situation with a man, presumably a young man, who has volunteered to fight, and does that make Dmitri feel bad or guilty in any way? Does he really believe that he's not fit, that he really is sick? Was he really sick? Not so sick that he couldn't be, sort of having a good time in Moscow. So again, that's something to explore. That's something I want to explore in the novel. It's something I want to explore. Yeah, if I can find anything out about that. It's not telling us much in relation to this. This is before he started doing every 10 days, doing a long diary entry in which he really confides in whoever he thinks his future reader will be. Okay, so a very early dinner with GM, then off to the theater, the Maly Theater, I think, and seeing these two plays. Apparently they were doing a double feature. So Sadovskaya, a very famous Russian playwright, this play was relatively old. It was first produced in 1860. One Old Friend is Better Than Two New Ones, a comedy about life in Moscow. And then the other one, a famous play by Molière, The Imaginary Invalid. It stars this woman, Olga Sadovskaya. Olga Osipovna Sadovskaya, who was in her 60s and would die in 1919. Seems like Dmitri's been meeting with a lot of people lately that only had a short time to live. Some of the young people who would die in the war or the revolution, other of them middle-aged people who would die in the revolution. So anyway, what happens next is really interesting because GM joins them for dinner. Dmitri, as every evening since he's been in Moscow, goes out with a combination of these ladies, and GM goes. And is this GM sort of inserting himself, and Dmitri not feeling like he can tell him not to come? I don't know that that's necessarily the case. In the next 1915 diary, there will be a development that casts some doubt on that about whether Laming really disapproved of this or not. So you'll see about that. And yeah, if it was syphilis that Dmitri had been treated for, then let us hope he was being careful. And apparently he was, at least in relation to Geltzer. But like I said before, that's speculative on the syphilis. Anyway, yeah, very interesting. And what is this about? Okay, so GM is there, and that really changes the atmosphere. It's boring. Whether Dmitri wanted Laming there or not, it turned the dinner boring, apparently. There was no kissing going on. Nastya was putting on airs. We still don't know who she was. I mean, I guess most likely an actress, but she was trying to act classy, as Dmitri tells us, around Laming. And Tamara is described as feeble, or another translation of that word is frail. So I don't quite understand that. And she was pathetic to the point of madness or insanity, that kind of madness. So yeah, gosh, this one that Dmitri had already told us was so tasteless in her dress and just annoying and boring. So, very interesting. I don't know, what was going on with this. The only person who's not criticized here, as you note, by Dmitri, of the ladies, was Geltzer. She's the favorite of his at the moment, 38-year-old woman. It's interesting because actually my tripod here doesn't go that high, so I'm resting it on a book by a famous Jungian analyst named Erich Neumann, called The Great Mother, about the Great Mother archetype. And that made me think that Dmitri, actually, the name, it's a Christian name now. My Christian name is Dimitrios, after Saint Dimitrios of Thessaloniki. But before it was a Christian name, it was a name that meant a disciple of Demeter. So Demeter, one of the Great Mother archetypes in mythology, in Greek mythology. And, in a way it's kind of apt, isn't it? Because he's always looking for this mother/lover in the various women in his life. Did he want his mothers to be his lovers? Or did he just make passes at them because he kind of felt like he needed to? because that was what he did, and he needed to see, you know, if they were going to slap him or if they were at least going to be sympathetic and laugh him off. He made a laugh it off, I should say. Nobody wants to be laughed at. He similarly made a pass at Irene Castle of the famous dancing duo Fred and Irene Castle that she describes in her memoirs. They were in a car together, and he made a pass at her, and she, you know, she didn't want it to go further. He apologized, but, you know, again, she laughed it off, you know. She thought it was funnier, so she tells us if he was around nowadays, he would definitely be Me Too'd. But I wonder if he actually really meant anything to come of these passes, or if it was just some sort of preliminary to seeing if he could kind of trust this woman to be one of his mother figures. Anyway, pure speculation on my part. Yeah, what do we have next time? Well, another very, very interesting 1939 section of the Grunwald letter, because this time Grunwald talks about the reaction to these quite definitive interviews that Dmitri gave in the press, and specifically he talks about the reaction in the courts and chancelleries of Europe. So by courts, of course, he doesn't mean judicial bodies, but he means the royal houses of Europe. And he goes into some detail about that, about how the various royals reacted, and the chancelleries, of course, the political organs, the governments of the various European countries. So that's fascinating stuff. That will be the next video, and after that, when we go back to 1915, we will have Dmitri rehashing this boring dinner and what was wrong with it. And here, as I said, with something a little equivocal with GM, Dimitri's going to go over to Nastya's and find GM at her house, find Laming at her house, and then we're going to have a discussion with Ella about Maria and what Maria's up to, and a new actress contact. So both of those will be jam-packed, so for sure come back and take care, and I'll see you next time.